This is the TJ Hoisington Podcast. Unleash your greatness within.
Hey there, I hope this episode finds you doing great. Welcome to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. Hey, listen, I was recently on someone else's podcast, a friend of mine named Fabrizio, and I thought I would just share this podcast with you. You're my followers, you're part of my community. I want to be as transparent as possible, and we got into toward the end, some heavy conversations that might catch you a little bit off guard. Maybe not. You know, I'm all about universal law principles, those principles that have worked over thousands of years and decades and so forth. And they just seem to ring true to me. That's why I wrote If You Think You Can. I based it on 13 laws. And by the way, I'm going to be doing a podcast tomorrow on Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. And I realized, I don't know why I didn't ever think about this before, because I read the book many years ago. His book was also based on 13 principles, and so is If You Think You Can. And so anyway, just remember that no matter where I have found you today, remember that life experience has a lot to do with how you interpret your world, your thinking. And so I hope that no matter how good or bad your circumstances are, that you're able to manage your thinking and your perspectives, and so that you're not hitting those peaks and valleys, but really just more of a consistent, not that it's ever going to be perfectly consistent, but consistently on a forward track toward you unleashing your ultimate potential. All right, so with this interview, hey, enjoy it, grab what you can grab from it. Leave a review at the end if you don't mind, but I hope you enjoy the message, and I hope it's a reminder to you about your own happiness and where you should center your values. Okay, let's just jump right into it. All right, here we go.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Quantum Action. We've got my good friend TJ Hoisington with us today from Seattle, Washington, United States. So way over the other side of the world from me here in Manchester in the UK. TJ is a successful author. He's a business coach, a leadership development person. He helps people develop their leadership, discover their talents, and develop them. He's been doing this for many years. He started off by working with Tony Robbins, who most of you probably have heard of, and now he's out there doing his own thing. So TJ is going to talk to us a bit about what he does and what he's been seeing in companies and after the lockdowns and where things are going and what each one of us can do to really bring out that greatness within, as it says there behind you, TJ. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. This is great.
So TJ, tell us a bit about, so you started with Tony Robbins, and then what happened?
Let me just say that before Tony Robbins, it was Jim Rohn. And I know you know who Jim Rohn is. And most of probably your followers probably know who he is, the business philosopher. I was 15 years old when I went to my father's bedroom trying to look for some money on his dresser that I could take to go buy some candy. And there was no money there. And I noticed a tape on his dresser. And I picked up the tape. It was given to him by someone else. And on one side, the tape said, "The Day That Turned My Life Around." And on the other side, it said, "How to Live Financially Independent," in my dad's handwriting. I thought, I came from a big family, 8 kids, little money. I thought, financially independent, I'll take that. So I took that tape, cassette tape, and I put it in my pocket. I went upstairs to the bedroom I shared with my brother, and I took out, for some of your listeners might remember many years ago, there was the yellow Sony Sport Walkman. I put the cassette tape in the Walkman, I put it on, and I laid in my bed. And that first month, I must have listened to that tape over and over and over of Jim Rohn talking. And then it was through him that I started to think bigger about possibilities and so forth. And then I started a couple companies in my early 20s.
Was this before you served your mission? Because I think your mission is something that
I served a mission in Taiwan. When I was 19 years old, I served a mission for 2 years in Taiwan.
If you want to just briefly explain that to those that are watching and don't know what the mission thing is. If you want to briefly explain.
So for my faith, we have about 70,000 young men and young women that go out for 2 years at a time, and they just teach principles of the gospel of Jesus Christ and how to live a peaceful and happy life. And so that was one of the things that I did when I was 19 and 20, 21 years old. So I went out.
But you went to Taiwan, Taipei. Was it Taipei?
Oh yeah. Listen, I went over there, couldn't speak Chinese. I mean, I knew a few words, but even those few words that I knew, by the time I got there, I tried to say those few words and people would say Ting Bu Dong. And I was like, what do you mean? That means I can hear you, but I don't understand you. And I would say, but I'm saying the words exactly. What do you mean? I practiced this over and over and over. And what I learned was those 5 tones in the Chinese language, the Mandarin language, are really critical to understanding what you're saying. And so, you're there talking every day on the streets and so forth. Within about 8 months to a year, now you've gotten really comfortable with the language and so forth. So then I learned how to speak Chinese.
So that must have been a very formative part of your life. Did you listen to Jim Rohn before you went on your mission or after?
I was 15, so that was before.
Okay, yeah.
This is an interesting point that some people may not know if they follow me, is I did not read my first book until I was a junior in high school. I didn't believe I could read. Yeah. I fought it. I was a slow reader. It was difficult for me to do. And then I get this opportunity to go to Taiwan and learn Chinese. I mean, I didn't get to choose where I was going. So I was a little bit dumbfounded that, hey, a guy like me that can't read and blah, blah, blah would be asked to go learn Chinese. But I learned from that. And I interviewed here, a couple of years ago on the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast, the publisher of Forbes magazine. And Rich Karlgaard, he wrote a book called Late Bloomers. And that's what I think for me, what happened. I mean, I made some good strides with Jim Rohn. I went on a mission. I started to expand my belief system. I started to read more books and so forth. And the rest is really history. But it was after that mission that I was working in Washington, D.C. And then I got started in a couple businesses, which I wasn't happy building those businesses. I was making good money, but I wasn't happy building them because I wasn't living my ultimate dream life. And that's when I reached out to Tony Robbins and he hired me and I spent a year working with him. So that's sort of the quick little.
Okay, good. Yeah. So you spent a year with Tony Robbins and then you decided it was time for you to go off and do your own thing.
This is cool. I was sitting in the audience. My wife, Danielle, with our second son, was pregnant about 6 months or so. We were sitting there in one of his programs when he stood up and he talked about living your dreams. And this is what he said. It was an embedded command. He said, when would now be a good time to live your dreams? And I remember hearing that and going, yeah, I'm living your dream. I'm not living my dream. And I nudged my wife. I said, I'm going to give my 2-week notice. And then I left 2 weeks later and I went to start my own company and fell flat on my face in the beginning days. So I know what pain feels like anyway.
Yeah, good. So you started then, you wrote your first book, if you want to tell people about how that came about, which is interesting.
Okay, so when I left the Tony Robbins organization, I called my parents and I said, hey, Mom, Dad, can I take my little family? Our house in Utah is being rented out. We don't have a home to go to right now. I said, is it possible that we live in the basement of your house? Which their house is actually kind of cool. It's a walkout basement. So it was a separate studio apartment, if you will. Yeah. And they said, absolutely. I said, Mom, Dad, I'll only be there for 2 months. As I do my first Power to Shape Your Life seminar, the old CD set down there. I used to do these seminars called the Power to Shape Your Life. And 2 months, and then we'll get out of there. We'll be on our way. Well, those 2 months turned into 5 years in the basement.
Oh, wow.
It was hard. There was difficult moments with that and so forth. But at the moment, my wife kept saying, maybe you should go get a job. It's when I thought, no, I get what you're saying, but I'm not going to get a job until I exhaust every idea, every angle that I thought about to make this work. And the one thing that I was dreading to do was to write a book. I'd always put that on the back burner. I'd go out and give speaking engagements for a couple $100 here and a couple $100 here, and I'd find an opportunity here or whatever. But we were slowly moving backwards financially, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Finally, my wife, in fact, we had one car that was repossessed. So I know what building a business is like from that aspect. But then I said, honey, it's summertime. You got the kids. They were young at the time. Can I just take the car that we did own outright? And can I take that car and I'll go down to the local parking lot at the grocery store, and I'll just sit in the parking lot and I'll just start typing. And that was when I wrote my first book in 2004 called If You Think You Can. I thought when I got done after 2 months of writing the rough draft, I thought I better get a couple people to, or at least one person, famous person, to endorse the book. So I was thinking I'll send it out to like Brian Tracy and Tony Robbins and Ken Blanchard and Hap Klopp, the founder of the North Face. I'll send it to all these guys and hopefully one of them will give me an endorsement. So I sent 3-ring binders of the rough draft to all these people. And lo and behold, in about 6 weeks or so, out of 20 requests that I sent out with the 3-ring binder, I got 19 endorsements back by big legendary names. I was blown away. And one of those people I asked was the president and founder of a huge company called Legal Shield, who called and said, hey, you sent us a copy of the manuscript. And he called me on a Friday one day and he said, I give you 2 A+. Number 1, you wrote a great book. Number 2, you were persistent. You called my assistant 80 times over the last 6 weeks, checking if I had been reading the book. So I give you 2 A+. And he says, because of that, we want you to speak at our national convention in a couple months. If you can have 15,000 books available, we will have roughly 15,000 people there. I said, I would love to do that. No problem. We got off the phone. I called my brother. I said, Steve, I don't have the money. Can I borrow the money to print 15,000 books? He gave me the money. I told him I'd pay him back first. I gave him 50 cents on every book. I went and spoke at that national convention, and the rest is history. I sold roughly 15,000 copies of the book at that big convention. And that by the end of that year, I had sold almost 100,000 copies of If You Think You Can back in 2005. So that was sort of the beginning days of how I was in a dark place, but I didn't give up. You never give up, never. And then you finally hit that river, that thread, whatever it is, and you realize all that preparation. It's a 10,000 hour rule.
Yeah.
All that time before, in hindsight, was preparation. And now there's a lot of people over the last, I would say 10, 15 years that want to be motivational speakers, want to be consultants and so forth. They'll put a few videos up. But listen, you got to be here's my thought. A lot of them come and go, and then they end up getting a job and they don't stick with it and so forth. It's like anything. You get zeroed in, you get focused, you're willing to sacrifice, you're willing to sell books in the back of trunk of your car, you're willing to go do and become do and so forth. And I tell you what, if you're consistent over time, the fruit will grow. So,
yeah, good. So where are you today? So you're offering, your leadership development to companies. Tell us those that are watching what you do when you go into a company. What problems can you solve, and where are usually the issues with companies?
So in the beginning days, I was going after individuals to sell books or programs or whatever. Early on, I was able to work with a consulting company and then branch out and do my own thing that worked primarily inside organizations, so companies and so forth. So for 20 years, I've been working with leaders inside companies. And so we do a couple things just to keep it simple.
Yeah.
We have a program called Maximizing Human Performance, which is a full-day program that just helps teams and individuals be the best you could be.
Yeah.
But what I have found, Fabrizio, in the last 5 years is there's not enough leadership development. And so what ends up happening, you have these executives that are like, I'm worried about the next tier of leaders. And
okay,
so
now let me just stop you on that, because this is a very interesting point.
Okay.
Why do you think there's a lack of leadership development? Is this originate back in the home, the family, mom and dad?
I do. Of course it does.
Because we were talking before we started doing the podcast, we were talking about the crisis today that men have and women have, and that men don't really know how to be a man, and women don't know how to be a woman, and they're trying to make women become men and men become women, and it's kind of all mixed up right now. Do you think that could be playing into the fact that there is a lack of leadership in general? I mean, we just had a new prime minister nominated today in the UK.
Yeah, I was going to ask you.
And there were two options, and they're both dead meat as far as I'm concerned. And now those that politically like, and I'm a conservative, and I voted for conservative all my life. Okay, I did vote for Brexit, and I'll openly say that on here. And if you don't like me for that, well, then go away. but what I'm trying to say is that there is a lack of leadership in the world. There's very few people that can really say something and actually stick for themselves and stand up and do. So do you think this may be originating back in the home? Where is this problem? Where's the root of the problem?
I do think, there are some voices out there that are pretty strong from different angles, media, techno giants, and so allowing certain voices to get through that shape the young and impressionable minds. But if you're asking me if it begins in the home, yes. As a parent, I think of my own kids. I taught those fundamental, unchanging, universal laws of respect, hard work, discipline, sacrifice, and so forth, and then taught them how to work. And not only that, taught them how to respect adults. I mean, simple things. There's a lot of a lack of respect. And I do think we have to be careful what voices we allow into our head. And I think that there are principles. There's a role that parents play in shaping the minds and shaping the futures of their kids. And I think my personal belief is, I think what's missing today is consistency. I think, I live in the United States, and there were certain principles that have been around for a couple hundred years that people just agreed with, right? They were fundamental, they were true. A lot of those in the last couple of years have been spun on their head. I was watching the Elvis movie the other night.
Okay.
And then I just happened to go on, I don't know if it was YouTube or whatever, and I was just Googling, and Piers Morgan was interviewing Priscilla Presley.
Okay, yeah.
Halfway through that interview, he goes, "What do you think is going on in the world today?" Is, something to that effect. Anybody can go look at it.
Yeah.
She goes, "It's really a mess. I'm really concerned. You can't say what you really think. You have to be very delicate in how you say things." It's like, what's going on is what Priscilla Presley was saying. And I think there's probably listeners that are listening to this that wonder the same thing. And I will just say, I think you can find safety in making sure you're rooted in true, unchanging principles, natural law. There's certain things that have worked for thousands of years. And if you'll align with that and still be respectful of people, I'm not asking you not to be respectful of anybody, but align with those universal principles. I just think, here's the problem. People trade what they want for the moment for what they want long-term. And unfortunately, some of the things that are happening in the moment may not be beneficial long-term if we take that all the way to the end. Right. So I don't know what else I can say on that, but hey, work hard, be the best you can be. Don't take things personally.
But the thing is, TJ, we're seeing a lot of people being censored. And we saw the situation with that gentleman called Andrew Tate, which is a bit of a controversial individual. I don't agree with everything he says, but he does have a message. It does resonate with certain people. I think I'd agree with probably 70% of what he says about the fact that there is an identity crisis, in particular for men. A young boy's growing up maybe with a single mum, that hasn't got a father figure in the home, doesn't really know what a man is. I mean, define what a man is. And there's like a lot of confusion. You've also got a lot of schools now banning people from saying prayers in schools. They're trying to take God out of people's lives. And I certainly remember an incident that happened to me. This was years ago when I first flew into Berlin. Okay. Now from the cockpit, you have a really good view, some fantastic views. So I'm flying into Berlin, Germany, and the airport I was going into was close to the border between East Berlin and West Berlin. This is after the wall had been knocked down, by the way. Okay. So I'm coming in and I could see the difference in the architecture of the buildings. Now, on the Western side, you had a lot of creativity and you could see there was heart in the design of the buildings. On the Eastern part, they all look the same, very bland. And I asked myself the question, what's the difference between the West and the East here? Is that the West still allow God in people's lives. In the East, they embrace communism or socialism, call it what you want, it's the same thing. The core belief of communism or socialism, as some people call it, is that God doesn't exist. Man is at the center of the universe. And as soon as you take God out of that society, creativity and everything vanishes.
Morals vanish.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so do morals and values and whatever. And I think while America is founded on the principles of the US Constitution, which incidentally, if anybody does, take the time to go and read the US Constitution and study it, you can see it's based off of Christian values.
Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah, Judeo-Christian values and God. And if America leaves that and turns to socialism, like some faction is trying to make it happen, like it's happened in other parts of the world, we can see that wherever communism or socialism has happened in a society, it's failed. It's failed. Because, and I think it's failed because they're taking God out, and God's created the universe. And now I'm not trying to get preachy or anything there, but God is there, whether you call him Allah, whether you call him God or Jesus or whatever type of religion or faith that you have. Having faith in a higher being, I think, helps man to be a bit more grounded. And then we come into the role of man and woman. Man and women were not put on the earth to compete with each other. They were put on earth to work together as a team. And when you have your kids play sports, you know that when you're in a sports team, some people are there to attack and score, and some are there to defend. And then you've got the people in the middle, which connect the attackers with the defenders. And everybody has a role. And in that basketball team or soccer team or whatever, everybody's important in their role. But if you take the guy that's the goalkeeper and put him up front to score the goals and take the guy that scores the goals and put him in as the goalkeeper, and that's not really their talent, you're going to end up with a bit of a skew-whiff team. And it's the same in a family. I think one of the crises of leadership is that children aren't growing up in a household with a positive male and female figure. And maybe one of the problems today is a lot of women have to go to work and the men work and the children come home from school. And how many hours a week do the children spend with their parents compared to maybe 100 years ago?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, we live in a different time than 100 years ago. Obviously, you come from a more traditional place. Here's what I think. I'll show something.
Yeah.
In 1983, Time Magazine came out with an article called The Me Generation.
Mm-hmm.
In 2013, Time Magazine came out with a follow-up 30-year anniversary of that article, and they call it the Me Generation. I find it interesting that in the article, they basically say that the average phone has 87 pictures of themselves, so selfies on the phone of themselves. And that would be similar to a baby boomer or Gen X or whatever person having 87 pictures of themselves instead of Steve Young or Michael Jackson or Madonna or something. Yeah. They would have 87 pictures of themselves in their bedroom. And I found that just to be interesting. So I was doing some executive coaching last week, and I was just mentioning that somehow we got on this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And this is with a long-term employee that's been with the organization I'm working with for 34 years, hard worker, loyal to the company, only has a couple years left. And I said, do you find it interesting? And she said the same thing. She says, well, what do you think has changed between now and 100 years ago? And I said, probably, in the 1800s, people worked in the community, people worked in the family. They all knew the law of the harvest. They knew what they had to prepare for, all hands on deck. They all need to work and help prepare the harvest and so forth. And whereas today, and so that was your network back then. And it included, as you said, it included God. It included, I think, by and large, for society 200 years ago, most people believed in a higher power.
Particularly in America. I mean, if I think some of my ancestors, when doing my family history, I discovered some ancestors in the 1600s moved from England to America. And what drove them to go across the Atlantic was religious freedom, which wasn't happening in Europe. And if they wanted religious freedom, they needed to go to America. And that's what they did. And so a lot of these families in the 1800s will probably get round the dinner table at night and say a prayer before they ate, and then probably read the Bible together.
Probably. Yeah, I would think so from my own ancestors.
Yeah.
So So then I was sharing that. This lady asked me, what do you think the difference is? And I said, well, it seems to me one of the common threads is society today, secular society today, has worked really hard at eliminating God from the conversation, from any aspect of our work life, our school life, everything else. They've eliminated it. And so what's the difference? And we both agreed that without a higher power, what's your true north? What's your moral backbone? Where does that come from? And if it becomes just about me, and not about respecting other people and being kind to other people and noticing something that needs to be done and lifting a finger to help serve someone, if it all becomes about me, that's my worry. And I would say, even in the personal development industry, that is one of the challenges with personal development. The whole industry as a whole, it turns people onto themselves for the answer. Instead of, you look at the personal development from the books from the early 1900s and so forth, like Think and Grow Rich and W. Clement Stone and so forth, every single one of them said, yes, you could be successful, but you got to include a higher power, right? And at that same time, I have a brother that when he was a teenager, this is kind of getting personal. He was a teenager and he was with a group of friends, right? I always tell the younger groups, right? You want to see your future, look at the 5 friends you hang around. Yeah. It's kind of a common thing out there. And when this is 20 years ago, he started to hang with people that were doing drugs and so forth. What do you think he started to do? He started to do drugs. And so for 18 years, he was high. He was doing things that were not good, punching holes in the walls, and it was difficult. And we would all stand on the outside and go, come on. And we would feel bad for my mom and dad and so forth. And it was really difficult. Well, then one day a little skirmish happened in the front yard and he got thrown in jail for 30 days. He wanted us to bail him out. I thought, no, this is probably a good detox situation. So we didn't bail him out. There's a lot of love there, and he understood, and but he needed the time to cleanse. And when he got out of jail, about 3 months later, he came over to my house, and I was expecting to still see the paranoia, the fast talking, all these things, not listening very well and so forth. And he was a totally different guy. Now, I understand maybe there was remnants of substance still in his body, but it was cleaned down a lot. And I said, what about the miraculous change that you're having? And he said, I've been going to the AA meetings twice a day for the past 3 months. I haven't had a lick of alcohol ever since. I've been reading this blue book, which gives a lot of the big blue book that gives a lot of great principles. And so he left that day. And this is my point. He left that day. And I thought to myself, personal development. And I thought, I'm going to go buy the big blue book and I'm going to read it. I want to see what Brett is reading because I'm seeing a change from the associations, but also the book. the book that he referenced. Guess what the first chapter was in that book? The first chapter was examples of really well-known business people, and some not famous or anything, just mothers and fathers who were hard alcoholics that would go to psychiatrists. One person went to Carl Jung, right? You get these people that went all over to the four corners of the world to help them overcome their alcoholism. And then he says in that first chapter, he says, every single one of them only changed once they accepted a higher power in their lives. So I only say today, be careful with too much focus on the self. It might create some narcissism. So what's the antidote to that? Reach higher to understand what is God. Is it possible that there's a God? But more importantly, how do we serve God? We serve by serving each other, by not being argumentative, by not being critical, by trying to lift those around us in a positive way and showing kindness and respect. That is trading what you want for the moment for what you really want long-term, which is out there. And the lady that I was doing coaching with said, well, today it's not even the me generation. She says it's the me, we generation, or the we, me. I said, what do you mean by that? Says everybody, where it used to be around the dinner table and visiting as a family and having discussions, today, your sphere of influence is probably the 10 people you have in your circle on your apps and on your phone and so forth. And you got to ask yourself, is this group of people, they may have value, I'm sure they do, as people, as human beings, as children of God or whatever. But are they going to help you get where you ultimately want to go? What are the conversations that are happening? What is the focus? Are we blaming, or are we looking at the world from a sense of abundance, that there's enough for everybody, there's enough opportunity for everybody to go around, if you will get off your bottom and you'll go to work and you'll develop yourself and you'll try something new and you'll realize you have the capacity to do hard things. And that's where I think people have gotten away from being resilient, because I think in some part they're so focused on themselves instead of the world around them in a positive way, looking for the good. So that's kind of a little response.
Yeah. TJ, thank you very much. And we'll put links below to your website so people can find you, and also links to your podcast show, which you do weekly. And it's a great one for everybody to tune into. TJ talks about a lot of interesting, inspiring stuff, as you've heard here, and also has some interesting guests on the show. So thank you everybody for watching. Remember to subscribe to Quantum Action, and this is all about taking you from infinity and beyond, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Podcast listeners, thanks for listening. You've taken time out of your schedule, and I really appreciate it. Now do me a favor, if you like what you heard, star it. Thanks. Now go unleash your greatness within.
GreatnessWithin.com